Thank you very much for having me here. The ideas that I'm going to present here are part of ongoing work, so it's not yet finalized, so I very much welcome the opportunity for you to tell me whether I'm on the right track or on a completely faulty track. Maybe first of all, so considering the topic of this workshop, the connection between environmental ethics and philosophy of technology, first of all, I should explain, of course, why I am interested in Latour and Foucault and using both. I think for Latour, I think this is a bit obvious. Nature plays a very significant role in Latour's work, in his critique of modernity. So this is really his entry point into the critique of modernity. Latour is also mainly the inspiring figure behind the whole STS movement. The link with mediation theory, with post-phenomenology, etc. Philosophy of technology is also quite clear for Latour. It is less clear, I think, for Foucault, even though I think he shares with Latour this relational ontology that we have been talking about. He never explicitly talked about, like Latour, about politics of nature. So, of course, I know there is now a literature that draws upon Foucault, upon his use of, for instance, biopolitics, to talk about ecopolitics. But in Foucault itself, the entry point is, of course, less clear. And I think I found a good entry point in what he calls the eventalization of history, but I will try to argue that. Now, also what I should explain, or what attracts me to both these thinkers, is also that they are fundamentally political thinkers. So I think for both of them, reality is, or what we consider as reality, is the result of a political process, in the sense that there is no ultimate judge or transcendental reality that will tell us what the common reality for everybody should be. So in this way also, they both situate philosophy of technology and ethics or ethos within the political process, which is, I think, also a very interesting perspective. So let's look at both of them in turn. So like I said, for Latour, the connection is maybe more easily to draw through his project of cosmopolitics. Of course, Latour is very famous for his statement that nature never existed. And with that, he means the nature like it was conceived of in modernity, like there is a state of affairs, and we can establish a correspondence with the state of affairs through the exact sciences. So for Latour, really, nature, there's always conflicts about nature, about what nature is. And these conflicts, they are really ontological conflicts. So for instance, the exact same, what we would call in modern jargon, the exact same mountain could if you draw the chain of associations, as Latour would say, in an economic world, this mountain appears as an economic resource, but if you draw a chain of associations in the religious world, this could be a spiritual being. So, of course, then the question becomes if we have, again, people that live, for instance, around this mountain, and they have to live together. So there is an ontological conflict over there. I think the question that motivates Latour is what kind of politics do we need for this kind of situation, so we can no longer draw upon, let's say, the convenient modern distinction between matter of facts and values. It's really the matters of facts also have to be commonly constructed. And there, so the answer that Latour gives is his cosmopolitical project. And what he means with cosmopolitics is not some kind of global political project, for instance, like we have seen in the construction of the planetary twin. So it's not about global politics, but according to Latour, so cosmopolitics is really about setting up a political process for the construction of a common reality. And this common reality that can be taking place in very limited settings, like in a laboratory, but it can also take place in, let's say, a meeting room of the United Nations, where we discuss about the Kyoto Protocol, etc. So it's not, it can take place in many situations, going from the micro scale to the macro scale. But there, of course, I find in Latour a bit of a ambiguity between, let's say, a descriptive stance, like the descriptive sociological stance, and a prescriptive stance. So on the one hand, I think he's saying that reality is political. So this is, you could argue, a metaphysical position that he takes. So this politics is happening anywhere, in any case. And you can describe this by following the actants, as is in his famous actor network theory. But on the other hand, he's saying, okay, since this political process is going on anywhere, let's find ways of doing it better. And that is then his democratic project, the politics of nature. So, yeah, how does that go, his democratic process? So it starts from matters of concern, so things that shake up the collective, that are a bit concerning, that are a bit weird to us, that we don't know how to handle. And then he has, in politics of nature, this whole procedure going to 4 different steps that end with institutionalizing the new matters of concern. Now, of course, like Foucault, I would say Latour has also many times shifted his perspective. So there are many different Latours, and as there are many different Foucaults. So I think, especially if you consider his more recent work on Gaia, etc., you see a shift in this politics of nature project, going from a focus on negotiation, deliberation, trying to come to some kind of reasoned argument about a way of living together. Whereas in his latest books, he really tries to make the point that, especially given climate change and given other existential risks to the planet, that we are now living in a situation of war. And this means that a situation of war, you have to consider who are your allies, who you want to ally with to save your life and the lives of those you care for, and who are your enemies. And he describes this as, so a fundamental conflict between what he calls the earthbound, so the one who follow his theory of creating associations, and the humans, the one that continue to think in the modernist perspective that nature is an object to be exploited. But still, so there is this. He describes it at the current situation as a situation of war. So following Carl Schmitt, political theory. So in this situation of war, there is always the possibility of violence, but still. You see in Latour, and that is, I think, in continuation with his previous work, still the focus on what he calls diplomacy. And so identifying the environmental ethics part in Latour, I think, is really tied to this figure of the diplomat. Now, what is the diplomat doing, of course, in the situation of war is trying to de-escalate the possibility of violence. Now, what I think is a bit problematic with this whole thinking of Latour and with the whole actor network theory, is that, yeah, it poses every object as a possible actant, as something that has an effect on another thing. And it is also, like in his later thinking, it's also much concerned with drawing strong networks, drawing or making strong associations, making robust associations. So there is a lot of focus on, let's say, the strength and the robustness of networks. And I think this is a bit problematic because, of course, yeah, strength is not the strength of a network. It's problematic for two reasons. So I think Latour's project is a bit idealistic in the sense that he works, you work within an existing situation, you work within existing networks that have established their strengths, for instance, neoliberal thinking, association with global economy. So can we just assume that this distinction between earthbound and humans and building new associations, that it can succeed in this context of, according to his own theory, you have to look at the strength of networks. So can it succeed? And also, yeah, in terms of ethics, according to Latour's own theory, something can be excluded from the association if it is not able to build strong enough connections or strong enough associations. And he gives himself, for example, the example of victims of traffic. And we continuously accept that each year there are victims of traffic. So according to Latour's theory, these victims are exteriorized from the network. But of course, yeah, that's an ethical problem that Latour, on his own account, is not able to really draw into his theory. So it's not just a matter of strength. Okay, so then moving on to Michel Foucault. So as I said, even yeah, for Foucault, even more than for Latour, I think he changes his way of thinking constantly. And that is, of course, also the whole point of Michel Foucault's, I think, main philosophical engagement is that he was continuously trying to transform himself and to become other. But I think one interesting notion that we might draw from his work is the eventualization. So what he was constantly trying to do is looking at history, but not in the conventional way that a historian would do it, so to draw some objective picture of what happened in the past, but to bring history to bear on what's happening right now. So this was always his theoretical interest, I would say. So he also chose his historical studies in a very particular way, for instance, about the history of the prison, the history of madness, because these things always tell us something about what we have become in the present. For instance, when he writes a history of madness, the reverse side of madness is, of course, rationality. So if he writes about the treatment of the mad people in the history, it also tells us something about rationality and the way that we construct rationality. So I think, so he always goes back into history to look at particular events, like, for instance, when the prison or imprisonment as a punishment was constituted as a kind of a universal punishment, because that tells us something about ourselves. And I think something similar could, of course, be done with climate change, for instance. What is this event of climate change? What does it tell us about ourselves? And the interesting thing with Foucault, of course, is that it also does not do this type of studies just as a kind of theoretical interest, but he also sees it as a kind of existential engagement. So the aim of doing these studies for himself and for others that read his works is to come out of these experiences, history as an experience, as a changed person, as a transformed person. And that is what he calls the limit attitude. What you see in Foucault is then this ethic of transgression, which leads to a transformation of the self. And I think you gave a very good example, because Foucault also tries to push us towards thinking the unthinkable. So he constantly pushes for the limit. What do we do with madmen in society? So can we imagine, we as rational people, can we imagine a madman and how he would feel? So I was I was happy that you gave your example of thinking the environment. Because if we look at limits in our present way of thinking, or how we set up modernity, there are, I think, still some things that are not really questions at all, like we all aim in our life for ever higher living standards. There is still this idea of perpetual growth. So I think Foucault would say, yeah, if you try to think beyond that, so what is the limit of this and what lies beyond? And this in Foucault's thinking is also much more an existentialist thinker than Latour. So it's really about transforming the self through these practices of limit experiences. So I can conclude right on time. So I would say, so far my conclusion from looking at these two thinkers in terms of linking environmental ethos and philosophy of technology, I think they both share elements in their diagnosis of modernity. So they aim for a critical renewal of the modern project. They are both not postmodern thinkers, but they want modernity to enter into a new phase. Also interesting is that they perform this critique of modernity through critique of modern epistemology. That's also something they have in common. And that their focus on reality as the result of a political construction process. So I think they both share some similarities in the diagnosis, but as far as I can see, the cure they propose is radically different. So for Latour, as I tried to explain, especially given the climate change problematic, it is about building strong alliances in times of war. And he sees this big distinction between the earthbound and the ones that's the humans that still try to hold on to the old modern project. He holds on to an ethos of diplomacy. And as I try to explain, I think this is very idealistic given the strength of existing networks. And also this mapping exercise that he proposes, I think he neglects the existential commitment of the people. So really what Foucault is talking about, the transformation of the self. So Foucault, he does have these aspects of the ethos of transgression, the questioning of the present. So that goes, I think, a lot deeper than Latour. But of course, what Foucault proposes, he had a big aversion of disciplinary responses in terms of what ought to be done. So he always advocates in favor of these new practices of freedom, but he could never, I think, give a good answer to the question, can technology save the planet, or these new practices of freedom or techniques of the self? Thank you.
I was struck by these sentences like matter of facts have to be commonly constructed, construction of common reality. Many examples like we see birds, I call it bird, someone else can call it UFO, someone else can call it airplane, whatever. to me, this is a direct link or implication to what I would call social subjectivism, not just I, but many people. So anything goes. If there is no fact apart from consciousness, human consciousness, or any other consciousness, then really anything goes. There is no fact. We create those facts, and each of us can create our own facts, and we can then perhaps gain some common ground. So if enough people agree on that, that's then the common reality. I could name dramatic examples. You don't want to hear these examples. What it leads to. So could you perhaps not elaborate, but maybe one example where this is not useful. Where it's so difficult for me to ask any sensible question, because this is so unacceptable, and I'm sure not just for me, but even if it was just me, it's just unacceptable that we create facts of reality. So perhaps no question, just remark.
No, I'm happy for this question, because of course, in 20 minutes I wasn't able to really fully present Latour's thinking. But Latour is, of course, he's completely opposed to what you are saying, which is social constructivism. So Latour is also very much a material constructivist. So what he's just saying is that there is no simple direct correspondence between our knowledge of the world and the world itself, if we can still say this in this sense. What he is just saying is that there is a lot of intermediary steps, mediations happening between what you would call a fact and our knowledge of it. And a good example would, of course, be climate change. Would we ever be able to talk about climate change if there wasn't, like you have shown, a really impressive series of research programs, funding money, computer programs, simulations, etc., going into this phenomenon to produce the fact of climate change. So Latour is not at all a relativist or an anything goes person. He simply draws out the fact that there are a lot of different mediations that like in his book Laboratory Life, there are scientists that have to work to produce reality. And in this work, they are living in a culture, they have to convince funding organizations. So his main point is that if you just say, well, this is a matter of fact, it's like that, it's a direct representation of reality, then you kind of, he compares it to a double bookkeeping. So you remain silent about all the work that has been done to produce this fact. That's just what he's saying. So it's not at all relativism or social constructivism.
Vincent.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Just to support a little bit the question. So in the post-truth age, for instance, people like Daniel Dennett, they said, they published also newspaper articles after the Trump election and also after the rejection afterwards, that it is especially philosophers like Latour that gave rise to this whole post-truth age, because whether it's a social construction or a material construction, it is in the end a construction, and that there is no fact or something like that. So even if you don't agree with each other, there is at least reason to believe that there is something problematic there. And I want to continue a little bit with that, because yeah, I mean it serious. I really like to read the recent Latour. But for me, as a philosopher, it is always very difficult to see any consistency. And because based on the original actor network theory, that is a flat ontology, while in the recent work, it seems to be the case that a new metaphysical or ontological question comes up. Now, you cannot have both at the same time. So that is, I was wondering whether that is also a little bit the direction of your criticism. Mm-hmm. And I want to make this concrete, this double bookkeeping, which might be inherent in Latour, if you talk about this diplomacy. On the one hand, he is using Carl Schmitt to say that we are in a state of war. And according to Schmitt, there is no diplomacy. Yeah? You are enemies, and there is no, you should be enemy. You shouldn't fight. It is not that far. But in this regard, from Schmitt's perspective, I would say, what the hell do we mean with an ethos of diplomacy? So is that not an inherent problem that Latour is picking up all kinds of theories? There are new developments, so then a new theory pops up, but there is no reflection on the consistency with the framework or the theories that he's using.
Yeah, so let me make it clear. I'm not really trying to defend Latour or. No, but I think I can agree mainly with your criticism, especially when you see how he treats the issue of climate change. So of course, if you look at the early Latour, you would say that, for instance, climate denialists, they are equally justified to their belief as long as they are building strong networks to support their claims. And I think because he was a bit scared of the consequences of his own thinking, you see the shift with the issue of climate change. You see the shift towards. I think it's in this book, an inquiry into modes of existence, that he comes up with the concept of trust. The trustworthy scientists saying that climate change is happening. So, and now in his later work, he's just saying like climate change is happening. We are in a situation of war, so you have to choose sides. So I think he gets more and more radical as a way to cover up, like, let's say, the flaws of his earlier mode of thinking. And I think that what you are saying here in a strong sense was maybe a bit muffled in my criticism of his constant mixing up or being ambiguous about where he is descriptive and where he is prescriptive. So that's also a kind of an annoyance that I also have with this work. So yeah.
We have one last question in the back.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the talk. I'm going to focus on Foucault for a change. Could you please elaborate a bit more on the transition from the ethics of care to the whole idea of how could you read Foucault from that perspective and how it applies to climate change? Like, do you see it as a form of activism? Do you see that, like, by practicing that ethos of care, it could just be a defiance to the status quo or the biopower in that sense? Or how do you read it?
Yeah, I think that, much more, even in opposition to Latour, that Foucault is all about resistance and trying to find a way to resist these dominant mechanisms. So I think in his earlier work, he was very good in analyzing systems of oppression, like disciplinary systems in prisons, or the way that madmen were excluded from society. And in his later work, that I refer to in this notion of care of the self, he was really drawing upon, let's say, early Greek thinking, Stoics, etc., about also how your soul as a person can be an object that you can construct by using techniques, what he calls the techniques of the self, like the mental exercises that Stoics used to do. Now, of course, it is difficult to say what he would say about how all of this relates to, for instance, climate change as an event. And I was actually looking for examples of what this Foucauldian attitude towards climate change could be, and I think something that maybe comes close is maybe, I don't know if you've heard of the Dark Mountain project. So this is kind of, people that withdraw themselves a bit from modernity and from this constant consumption pressure that you have, and they try to imagine other ways of living in a certain atmosphere of freedom. So Foucault is always trying to open up, trying to show us that there are more ways of being free than we think, by showing us the limits of present thinking. But he's not prescribing us, because that would, in a sense, be a contradiction of his own thinking. He's not prescribing us what this new freedom should be. Foucault is all about opening up a space of freedom, but not prescribing it. So.
Let us express our gratitude to Erik and to all the speakers from the morning.